Where are the men? The porn prolactin hypotheses. The evidence in terms of the association of prolactin rise and testosterone dropping seems to be quite limited. For years now, the argument was that, according to a few studies, after a couple of days of not ejaculating and thus not spiking prolactin via its main method of spiking, apart from inflammation, etc., which also seems to raise prolactin, after about a week, there was like a slight increase, and then eventually testosterone did nothing. I dare to present the following hypotheses. Increasing ejaculation frequency, let's say over a year, by raising average prolactin, reduces average testosterone. Domination and submission are two ends of the same spectrum. What does domination mean? Dominus is Latin. It means, at least in German, Herr. In English, Lord or Master. While in English it's not as clear. In German, the word Herr stands for man. In other words, the Latin word for Herr, which we now use for domination, is equivalent to at least one word for man or der man in German. The patriarchy. It does exist, obviously. Men are a breeding experiment led by women. David Buss quotes Sarah Hardy, which seems to not be a direct quote, but rather a paraphrased essence of works such as The Woman That Never Evolved and Father Time, A Natural History of Men and Babies. Every generation of men is an experiment where 50% of the male population genetically die after one generation. Guess how many women make it into the next generation via their offspring? 80%. And these are historic averages. The male range goes from 40 to 60 or from 40 to 50. So I simplified to a ratio of 1 to 2. Men are made to be selected. And what female choice seems to historically on average select is not the man at the bottom of the male dominance hierarchy, but the ones in the top 50%. And one only has to look as far as 50 Shades of Grey to realize that apparently, at least in romance novels, it's a superstar, the billionaire, i.e. top percentiles of the male status hierarchy. And of course, he's jacked and good looking. And that's what's in romance novels, the porn that women consume. But what about porn? Males face a very difficult problem to solve. They need to judge the fertility of the female. But since sperm only take a couple of days to produce and only a couple of seconds to minutes to ejaculate, for men, sex is cheap. For women, sex is costly. The minimum time investment per offspring, as David Buss describes in his book The Evolution of Desire, for a male is a couple of seconds, and for a female at least 9 months. Given a societal structure that, with a minimum investment of 9 months, brings the child up and thus counts as evolutionary success, one variable statement would be maybe the following. Females choose resources, hierarchical, financial, genetic, and males choose fertility. Fertility can be subdivided into two variables, age and beauty. In artistic photographs, the difference becomes clear. Some women are so beautiful that at age 70 or 75, they can still be presented in artistic photographs, but other women only have age working to their advantage as long as they are in the fertile range of maybe roughly post-puberty to age 30-35, until eventually menopause, for some unknown reason, ends the period of the female reproductive age. So if males select for fertility, how do they extrapolate fertility into the future? For one, the extrapolation does not need to go as long as for females. Of course, the mother is important in upbringing, but due to females choosing males with resources on historic average, work therefore distributes among the sexes. And as males don't carry the children, of course they can work when the female is pregnant. And in many societies also when the female brings the child to kindergarten and school. Of course, there is also a dimorphic size difference. Females are on average smaller. If now a male searches for fertility cues in order to predict that maybe from now until the next 10-15 years, the female could bring up his children, or maybe also multiple women could bring up his children, which for a male is quite feasible. For a female, while for females it's still possible to carry children from multiple males, it probably makes it harder to bring them up. If males now search for fertility cues, first of all, why do they do so? About 1 or 2 years ago, I did ask ChatGPT what would happen if you increased testosterone in women, first to low male, then to average, and then to high male levels, and eventually to super physiological doses of testosterone, maybe above the male range of 900 nanograms per deciliter. And while increasing the testosterone in this thought experiment in the women, I put the woman, or rather the female, into a cage with a male. I did ask ChatGPT, and this is ChatGPT, not Grok, what would happen once we reach super physiological doses of testosterone in the female. And the answer was that eventually thrusting behavior would begin. In other words, testosterone seems to be so powerful that if provided in super physiological doses to a female, it modulates the female behavior to such an extent where the female begins to seek to dominate the male in a sexual manner and begins to try to thrust the male. A reasonable marker of ejaculation frequency, with every ejaculation in a male causing a significant prolactin spike, which also seems to occur in females, one could reasonably model, for one, ejaculation frequency and associated with it how many significant prolactin pulses occur over, let's say, a year. The hypothesis is now the following. Once first with drawings, in the beginning maybe with words and imagination, and then with photographs, and eventually video with sound, and now 3D and VR, the female fertility indicators can be severed from the female. And not only this, but the top female percentile fertility indicators, i.e. the most fertile female, i.e. the females displaying the highest fertility. Once these can be severed and distributed via a medium, the male mind short circuits, and instead of trying to pursue actual evolutionary success by pursuing women in real life, it begins to pursue the superstimuli, despite this obviously bringing absolutely no benefit whatsoever. This might be the biggest tragedy of the invention of media. Pornographic material provides, compared to real life, a superstimulus. And because the male gaze is so visually heavy compared to the female gaze, which, I mean, it's a gaze, so the accessibility of porn targets the male mind and then begins to condition the brain of males to porn and not to real social sexual interactions. Once prolactin is released, this not only dampens the dopamine system, and eventually prolactin seems to decrease the secretion of testosterone. Quoting Grok, prolactin acts on the hypothalamus to inhibit kisspeptin neurons in the arcuate and related nuclei. Kisspeptin is the key upstream stimulator of gonadotropin-releasing hormones GnRH neurons. Reduced kisspeptin leads to loss of normal pulsatile GnRH secretion, decreased pituitary release of luteinizing hormone LH and follicle-stimulating hormone FSH, reduced LH drive to testicular Leydig cells, which sharply lowers testosterone biosynthesis. The result is secondary hypogonadism, low LH, FSH plus low testosterone. So not only does prolactin decrease testosterone, decrease dopamine, and thus prohibits the acquisition of the resources of the males that then eventually would lead to the selection by the females, but prolactin also increases the likelihood of calories consumed to be stored as fat, and also seems to cause an alteration of the electrolytes in the body, rendering the male in real time less attractive. Increased body fat excretes estrogen, resulting not only by the absence of testosterone, but by the additional presence of estrogen in a feminization of males. But